So I'll give a couple seconds for everybody to gather back. I did a quick walk around the room. It looks like you guys definitely have some complex students. And like you guys have tried a lot of interventions. I don't know where you got your ideas for interventions, but you guys are trying a lot of great things. Some of your posters noted success or lack of success with the interventions that you've tried. Other ones just listed out the interventions that you've tried. But I did notice several of those evidence-based practices listed on your posters. Overall, for those of you who maybe didn't know those practices were evidence-based and then you came and you learned that, or you read something and you learned that, have you found overall success with the use of evidence-based practices with your students? Yeah? Excellent. There's not one that works, right? I don't see one poster with one intervention listed. You all are trying so many things. And sometimes that's really tough because you put one in place for this and one in place for that and one in place for this, and it can get really complex, and sometimes it's hard for us to know which one really impacted. I saw one poster back here said, you know, it's really unknown. This one made great progress, but this one, we're just still not sure about that. I'm guessing all of you are taking tremendous amounts of data at this point. And I know that that's the life that we have all chosen. But data is really, you're not going to hear me say anything different than that. Data is absolutely the way in which you will prove the effectiveness of your intervention or not. And part of one of the things we'll address at the end of the day is, again, a non-answer from Christi and Nikki. But how long do you go? How long do you go? How long do you pursue? When do you change? When do you take it away? What do you do? And some of that decision making. And we'll talk about that at the end of the day after we walk through some of, I have to put my password back in, some of these other new things that we've learned. Sound good? Do you have the thingy? Which is my word for.
And why is that messed up? It's not full screen.
I don't know.
You're the Prezi queen.
I'm a Prezi queen, apparently. Here, we'll just do it that way.
Yeah.
There.
But we're on present.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, your thing is showing up.
Yeah.
I see what you mean.
It's not full screen.
Well, I don't know. That's okay, right? That's okay. We don't have to, yeah. Sorry, I don't know anything about that.
Love technology.
I am very low tech. When the thing wasn't straight, I just folded paper and put it under there. I'm as low tech as they come. So you just have to deal with me. Sorry. So one of the things that I'm really kind of happy to say, anybody who knows me knows that I don't mean to dog the deaf education field, but sometimes I feel like I'm dogging it because I give these presentations and I say, well, we're just missing the mark in deaf ed. We're only thinking about the deafness and we're not considering these other 5 things, and what are we doing in deaf ed prep and that. And I feel like I'm really dogging our profession, and that is not at all what I mean to do. And so I have challenged myself to really sit back and think. In deaf education, we are clearly using a lot of evidence-based practices. This room, whether you know it or not, are light years beyond the rest of the nation because many of them are using these interventions and are unaware that they're evidence-based, or they're using something and they're not sure what the real name for it is. They're just using their best guess. But we're doing lots of good things. We do a great job at teaching language. Those of us who work on speech or oral communication, we know how to do that. We've got these things down. This is our expertise. We know how to work on listening. We know how to teach content, right? Like, we're good teachers. We know how to do this piece. So this piece isn't missing. That's there. We are also using some evidence-based practices. And this took a little bit of Christi sitting down in the quiet, which doesn't happen in my world a whole lot. But when I started thinking through this summer, we're using evidence-based practices in deaf education, but we're not calling them what they really are. And I know Sherry and Raven and I have had this conversation. It was probably one of our conversations that sparked this whole idea for me. And we started to think through, what do we do in deaf ed? And can we match that with an evidence-based practice? And this is driven from several different forces. One, that I know that you are being held accountable for using evidence-based practices in the field. Our teacher educators are absolutely held accountable for that with a new kind of test that they have to do. Anybody working with our students knows that we have this great new requirement called the EdTPA, where our students need to be able to state, this is an evidence-based practice. I'm not shooting from here and here anymore. I'm shooting from what I know research tells me to do. And so we've had some lengthy conversations and a lot of deep thought. And really, if you look at what we do in deaf ed, just the givens, we're already using some evidence-based practices. So last year we talked about a category of interventions called antecedent-based interventions. The National Standards Report grouped like 50 different things into antecedent-based interventions. I've seen on several of these posters ABC. You guys know your ABCs of behavior. I know who you're working with. Y'all got behavior down. You know what an antecedent is. But do you recognize that what you're doing throughout your day is predominantly an antecedent-based intervention? It fits into that category. And I think it's really important for this room of people to adopt the language of the evidence-based practice and say, this is working. I know that if I do an acoustic treatment, okay, everybody in this room gave a recommendation for an acoustic treatment this year, right? We do it. We've known for 70 years that that works. The reason that it works is because that's an antecedent-based intervention. We are putting something in place prior to a behavior to ensure a greater likelihood of that behavior occurring, correct? It's all about access. When you talk about acoustic treatments, the use of amplification is an antecedent-based intervention. Teacher and student positioning. There's not an itinerant alive who hasn't taught a teacher where they should stand in a classroom, and hasn't taught a teacher that they shouldn't teach like this, right? We've all given that recommendation. That is actually an antecedent-based intervention. I think our job is to learn that. We can say positioning is important, treatments are important. These are all antecedent-based interventions. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, the other thing that we do really well is we do another antecedent-based intervention that we do pre-activities, right? We do pre-activity interventions. So we do things in deaf education. For those of you working with oral kids or kids that are working on listening, we do acoustic highlighting. It's absolutely an antecedent-based intervention. We pre-teach content. Oh, do we pre-teach content? Lots of content, lots of vocabulary. There is no clearer antecedent-based intervention than that. We know from our own experience that they're not going to get that word, so we better teach it. We better draw our horrible pictures on the marker board and try our best and file through our picture files and pre-teach that, because we know that's how deaf kids need it. That is an antecedent-based intervention. Where we miss the mark is just that we don't have research that says this works for deaf kids and it's an antecedent-based intervention. What we know about behavior is that these are all antecedent. These are all things we put in place prior to a behavior occurring. We do environmental enrichment because we hang stuff on our walls, don't we? We do word walls. We do all kinds of things like that. How do we we go in and we give the little lecture about how rooms should be where everybody can see. environmental enrichment, right? All antecedent. We label our environment a ton. We label it with words, we label it with signs, we label it with icons, we do all that kind of stuff. So we're doing wonderful things. When you look at the National Standards Report and look at their category of behavior interventions, we're also doing some great work there. We're prompting. We prompt a lot, right? We'll talk more and more about that. But we do a lot of prompting. We model and prompt. Modeling and prompting is probably, when asked what is different about deaf ed than any other education field, my answer is always that our entire field is based on modeling and prompting. That's what we do. It's what deaf ed has looked like for a long time. We pre-teach, we model, and we prompt.
And let me pop in really quick, because that's one of the core strategies also for, obviously these are the evidence-based practices, but one of those learning difficulties that our kiddos on the autism spectrum may have is that they don't pick up on that modeling. They are poor imitators, and so it's just not working.
You're a mess.
So we have to teach imitation. And so it goes back to using these evidence-based practices, and it makes you think about how many different things you have to break down and teach for our complex learners, because that's a great strategy that you guys are using. But if it's also a child that has an autism spectrum disorder, we're going to have to break it down and teach it a little bit differently so that they're able to move on.
Right, and that's one of the things that I'm really excited that we're going to talk about later today, is the difference between the prompting hierarchy you use for kids that are deaf and only deaf, and learn things the way that we all learned in deaf ed. And then there's another prompting strategy, and that's the one that we need to understand both of those. We need to understand the benefits when you use the least to most, when you use the most to least, and what are the characteristics of those learners when you're deciding which one to use. Technology hates me.
Oh, it's me.
Okay, so the other behavioral intervention that disappeared again is, oh, you just moved mine. Stop it.
Am I too far?
I don't know what's happening, but I'm just going to talk because y'all have your slides in front of you. Auditory and visual sandwiching. Does everybody know what I mean when I say that? I really don't know how to do this, so.
Here, I'll come over.
Okay, you do that, because, yep, that's beyond my skill set. Auditory sandwich. Everybody's got that one, right? Visual sandwich. Everybody, I'm getting a mix. Okay, so in deaf ed, historically, we have taught students doing what Dr. Lartz and I have now referred to as a visual sandwich, meaning that we tend to give the sign first, and then we provide a TC or an oral component, and then if that's not working, then we go back to the sign, right? It's a visual sandwich. So we'll do something like with our little preschoolers, we'll go, cat, cat, cat. See how that's a visual sandwich? With those young kids who are oral or using an LSL strategy, listening and spoken language, they use the opposite strategy, meaning that it's an auditory sandwich. So they're not going to provide that sign first. It's going to be in the middle. So they're going to go, cat, cat. See what those are opposites? But it's still that idea of multiple examples, multiple prompts. Those are a behavioral intervention. They could also be seen as an antecedent intervention depending on how you're using that in your instruction. But I would consider that grouped within an evidence-based practice.
Just look down. I can't even watch it.
Wow, yeah, I can't either. Reinforcement. Boy, you guys are really good at reinforcement. You really are. It's almost on every one of these that you all have chosen reinforcement strategies for your students. One of the things, if you're a note-taker kind of person, a kinesthetic learner, is that I want to challenge you when it comes to reinforcement, and not that typical reinforcement talk about, you know, find something motivating, think outside the box, la la la. You guys got that down. I'm going to challenge you to take your reinforcement idea one step further. And that is to go into this concept of differential reinforcement. Whether you're going to do differential reinforcement of an alternate behavior, so you're going to pick the thing you want them to do explicitly, intently, or an incompatible behavior. If you can make your alternate behavior an incompatible behavior, you're golden. Does anybody know what I mean when I say that? Incompatible and alternate? Yes. Okay. I'm going to assume a yes because no? Okay. All right. We'll just go with that. Okay. Differential reinforcement of an alternate behavior. Here's an example. If a student, let's see, is hitting. You guys have hitters. We obviously know we don't want to reinforce a hit, right? But what does reinforcement mean? You all know this. Does reinforcement mean it makes them feel good? No. What's reinforcement mean?
Anything that increases the
probability of changing behavior. Excellent. So reinforcement, whether or not we meant to do it or not, just means it's going to increase the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So a lot of times we inadvertently reinforce behavior. So we don't want to reinforce that kid hitting. So we want to reinforce something else. So rather than walking up to Nikki and punching her, I want to reinforce my student for walking up to Nikki and shaking her hand. Then every time she shakes Nikki's hand, I'm going to reinforce. That's an alternate behavior. That is not, however, an incompatible behavior. If you can choose an alternate behavior, that means that you cannot engage in both of those behaviors at the same time. That's incompatible.
So what's something that we can have the student do to keep their hands busy so that they're not able to hit? So that they are actively engaged doing something else which will decrease the chance that they're going to hit.
Right, so maybe rather than teaching a student to shake a hand, because I can sure as heck pound her into the wall, is maybe it's better for me to hand her something with both of my hands. You all have all seen this behavior, right? Why does this behavior work? It's incompatible. You cannot push a friend in the hallway and talk if you're walking down the hallway like this. People think, oh, well, it's such a teacher idea. It is a teacher idea. It's research-based. That is an incompatible behavior. So if you're picking a behavior that you want them to do instead, try to make it incompatible. Because if they can't engage in the behavior you want to get rid of, you've increased the chance of that working even more. Some behaviors you can't go incompatible with. You just try your best. So push yourselves to DRA, DRI, or what those things are called. The other is DRO, differential reinforcement of an other behavior. I'm getting a head nod. Tell me what your fear is about differential reinforcement of other behavior. I bet it's the same as mine.
Teach them what to do. In other words, it's teaching them, okay, I don't want you to do that, but you're not telling them what you do want to do to replace it.
Excellent. So the difference between DRO and DRAI, like she said, if you didn't hear, was with DRO, you're not teaching your expected behavior. All you're doing is reinforcing anything other than the behavior you don't want to see. So any mother or father or person, if it's ever been around a kid in here, has done this, where your kid is tantruming, and that's your worst Walmart trip this week. And so they're tantruming, and if they do anything but lay on the floor and kick you, you're reinforcing that, right? That's DRO. But that's not, I'm going to make you stand with your hand on the cart and walk nicely and quietly before I reinforce you. Does this make sense to everybody? Sometimes you have to go DRO before you can get to DRA, DRI. So it all depends on intensity of behavior.
One thing, decent teachers were great with this. Every 15 minutes, it would get a sticker if they didn't hit. But every 15 minutes, the EC teacher is using the word hit. So every 15 minutes she goes, hey, you didn't hit. You get a sticker. Well, guess what? Now you keep reinforcing hit, the word hit.
So what's important is the language we're using too.
Can you repeat that too so that everybody can hear what she said?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So she said, as we are talking about identifying the behavior that the student is not supposed to be engaging in, we're kind of calling out that behavior that we don't want to see. So they continually hear hit if we're telling them not to hit. So what we've done, and we'll talk about some other behaviors, instead of hitting, and of course, instead of hitting, we can say, ask for a break. So you can give them the example of the behavior, identify what that alternative behavior is that you want them to engage in, and use that language because that's only going to reinforce it more frequently than using that negative or that target challenging behavior that they continually engage in. So this is a visual that's falling apart, but it is from the website redandgreenchoices.com. It's a phenomenal website that does a beautiful job of pairing red behaviors, which are those behaviors that we want to decrease, with a green behavior, which is that alternative replacement behavior that we want to teach, that we want the student to engage in more frequently. And so we do a lot of pairing so that we can do the Ghostbuster no sign over that red behavior, but we give them the example of what we want them to do so that they can see it, so that they have an example of it, so that they hear it. And then when we reinforce, we call the behavior, we label the behavior that they're engaging in because we want them to continue to use that alternative replacement behavior.
I think it's red
And green choices.
choices.
.com. Red and green choices. Enjoy it. It's fun and it has lots of templates, lots of examples, and we need to fix my visual.
They get used a lot. So that's my challenge for you for reinforcement. I know you all know reinforcement, you understand reinforcement, you understand your ABC chain, but if you can even take your reinforcement strategy or your thinking about reinforcement to that next step, then it might just ensure even greater chances of success. Oh, I keep pushing the wrong thing. It's me. I swear it's me. Okay, so questions? Is everybody okay? Okay, I'm hot. I always sweat. It may be 20 degrees outside, but whew, you stand up here, you get a little personal summer going on. So we're going to move on to the brand new EBPs, just released 2 weeks ago? A week and a half ago. January, and they were just released. And this doesn't mean these are brand new interventions. We've been doing these interventions for a long time. The difference is now they are evidence-based.
And you guys are all familiar with what makes a strategy evidence-based, correct?
Yep.
Lots and lots and lots of studies behind them from peer-reviewed journals. So some of these have 800. I think the criteria is 200, that they have to have so many different research articles, studies done on each of these interventions to make them a research-based strategy.
Which is why my dear friend and colleague that I love so much, John Luckner, says we'll never have an evidence-based in deaf education to meet that standard. Because we don't have, A, that many kids.
The
B,
numbers.
That many kids that can fit in a control. We're spread out everywhere. It's just the nature of who we are and the nature of the researchers that work in deaf education. So it's not going to work for us to have a study that looks at 50 years of deaf education research, because we're never going to have 200 studies with the same sample of kids or the same characteristics that we tried one intervention with and it was all great and fine and dandy and bleh. Not going to have it. So what we need to do is look at how is what we're doing now fitting within those that have already been proven, or how can we utilize those that do have the research to back them up for our field. So some of these things we'll talk more about than others, and we'll give you our concerns with some of them as well. We're not going to stand up here and sell you a crazy Kool-Aid, but we're going to tell you what we know about some of these things. So this is the list of the ones that are new that we didn't talk about last year. The ones that we talked about last year are still a part of the evidence base for ASD. They have added cognitive behavioral intervention. That was a piece of the behavioral package last year. Now it has been pulled out as its own in cognitive behavioral intervention. Exercise has now been proven through enough studies that it is considered its own evidence base. It used to be considered a behavioral intervention and or an antecedent intervention dependent on how it was used in the classroom. So there are several of us who are very excited about exercise showing up as an evidence-based practice. Also equally exciting for those of us who have used PECS with students, PECS is now identified as its own evidence-based practice. We will do a very short PECS training as part of today. I know you all have heard me say this before, but
Yes.
9 times out of 10 when I walk into a classroom, PECS is not
Picture
delivered.
exchange communication system.
I'm sorry. PECS is not delivered with the fidelity in which it was intended. And so what happens is that everybody's teaching PECS in their own way, and then it doesn't work, or sometimes we have the icon and sometimes we don't, and so pictures don't work. Well, we're gonna teach you the beginning steps of PECS and know that it is evidence-based when delivered with fidelity.
How many of you have used PECS in your classrooms with the students that you're supporting? A true PECS program, or are you using pictures to communicate? Because there's a difference. You're using PECS with data collection. Awesome. You guys will be our helpers.
Excellent. So PECS is an actual communication system with a very systematic approach. And what happens is that you have to understand about evidence-based practices is this is PECS, not the use of some pictures. This is the actual system delivered as intended, delivered as written by the researchers. And it now has its own evidence base, which is exciting. I am also excited that response, interruption, and redirection now is considered its own evidence base. I know you all do this because y'all can look at your student and tell when it's going to happen, can't you? That's why you cringe on the days that you're sick and you go in even with a little fever. Because you know if you don't show up, that sub's not going to know that when Bobby does this, this is going to happen within 2 minutes. Because you all know. And so what you do is you interrupt the behavior chain and you redirect and you put things in place and you support. It now has an evidence base, which is exciting for our field. Scripting out those social narratives and things like that are all now considered their own evidence base. Structured playgroups, which is really exciting for young kids that need to learn that peer interaction, especially. Woo! You okay?
Yeah.
I want to make sure you're all right. All right. Structured playgroup is there. And then we now have technology-aided instruction and intervention. Don't get too excited about this one, because when we show you the definition of it, it could pretty much
It's kind of muddy waters.
anything. They haven't defined that. It's still real broad. So what they did was they took basically all the studies that use some sort of technology and grouped them together and said, hey, technology works. And in some ways it does, but it's not going to say use this app. If you use this app or this technology, that's going to be your save-all. It's not going to tell you that. It's not that kind of answer. And then lastly, and very exciting, this will get into our prompting conversation, is the use of time delay. And I know you all use time delay in your classrooms, and if not, we will get you there today. But these are the new ones. It's very exciting, very hot off the press, and we'll just probably be able to skim over theirs fairly quickly because, you know, this could be an entire semester, but we won't do that to you. And lunch is in 30 minutes. I'm very aware of when the food should, or 45, is it 12:15? Okay, 40.
Should we change our schedule so the food doesn't have to sit?
We'll follow Sherry's lead. That's
Yeah.
always you just tell me when to stop. Just
We're
keep going.
flexible.
But so are you all. I love it. Okay. So you all saw on the, hi, I'm having word retrieval. Thank you. Isn't that funny? I can't think of the word, but I can, when I have Alzheimer's, you guys just come visit me because y'all will be the only ones who can communicate with me because I can come up with this every time, but the word is just gone. They should just make a wing for us, I tell you. When you all came in, there were two handouts. There was the handout for the Prezi that we're doing now, and then there was also, and this is not a self-plug by any means, but the Kansas Autism Center, the Technical Assistance
Support Network.
Support Network for ASD,
Right.
asked Stacy and I and Nikki if we would put on 2 webinars in December. So we did 2 webinars on these same concepts, evidence-based practices in ASD used for deaf kids. Y'all got that in a much longer version. They also asked us to write a very quick newsletter for their December newsletter. And they asked us if we would please identify, if we had to pick out core strategies, if we only had the 30-second commercial for what you have to have in place for deaf kids with autism, what would they be? Well, that's a hard decision to make because we want to list out like the 80, but I've been an itinerant teacher. I know you don't list out 80. You start with your first couple, right? And you get them happy, and then you move on to the next few. So these were the 5 we came up with. Absolutely FBA. Everybody in here has done an FBA. I cannot recommend any support for any student without the recommendation of an FBA. FBA is the number one most important for us. After that, you must teach a functional communication system. That doesn't mean that you're going to engage in that, are they going to be oral or sign, age-old discussion and conversation. That means how are you going to teach your student to get their needs and wants met? Period. Regardless of how it looks, regardless of the mode, functional communication is the second step.
What's that formal communication system going to look like?
And you got to make that decision. How many of you feel like you're here because nobody ever made that decision? I felt that way a lot with my students. God, if just the first grade teacher would have just put her foot down and made a decision, I wouldn't be here at 14 still trying to figure out what is this system going to be.
Because if we don't have a system, they're going to go back and they're going to use what's easy for them, what's been reinforced, which is their behavior. And so that's why identifying that formal communication system is so important.
Absolutely. And we've already talked about this, but reinforcers are absolutely critical. And really knowing your students is the key to identifying the effective reinforcer. Yes, ma'am.
We're going through it right now with a 10-year-old. No one's propagating a functional communication system. But just the replacement behavior itself, if you can just teach them something, because a lot of times when we're replacing behavior, they have to learn this way out here. And we say, that's great. What are you going to teach them now?
What's in the meantime?
In the meantime, I'm sure you're going to teach them all the skills, and then you have to teach them the iPad, whatever. What can you do now? And how can you build out that for replacing behavior? Right now, it is immediate things like that. Otherwise, we're still going to be different.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where functional communication training really comes into play. And oftentimes we can jump right there because typically you guys are in this room because there's massive behavior going on. And you know that you have to teach them an alternate right now because otherwise my husband keeps asking me, how long are we going to be dealing with permanent scars, Christy? How long? Pretty much till I can't walk anymore. That's how long we're going to be dealing with permanent scars. But you have to intervene. And so functional communication and the right here, right now is very clear and easy to think about when you have a kid that's biting you every time you walk into a room. But when it is a more subtle behavior, it's just as important. But we don't put the fires, blow the fan on that fire sometimes.
What's easier, raising your hand or screaming?
Absolutely.
Screaming. What's going to get a more consistent response from people in the classroom? Screaming. Which one's quicker? Which one's going to get that response faster? Screaming.
Regardless of who they're with.
Exactly. And so we have to make it so that raising the hand is reinforced, is just as easy as that scream. Otherwise, they're not going to use the hand. They're going to go to what's comfortable and what's habit, what works for them. And so using reinforcement, trying to identify what that first step is in teaching a communication system, reinforcing that and building trust, because oftentimes when we build trust and students get reinforced, they're going to more likely use that behavior that we're trying to teach. But it takes time also.
Absolutely. And then this one won't surprise you, but visual strategies and environmental supports. Anyone who has used the system of Teach out of North Carolina knows that the start of a Teach classroom starts with structuring your environment and putting very clear visual boundaries in place and being able to walk in a room and know what's expected when and where without any need for language, without any need for words. I can tell that this is a work area and this is not, and it is very visually clear, and I'm supported, and it's consistent. So that, to me, I love that when you go through, if you ever get the chance to ever go to North Carolina and go to that Teach Center, the way that they just say to set up your classroom can be a complete change, can completely change your thought process on what your classroom can look like and why that's a support, even though it may look boring to you. And then lastly, choice making. We really struggled over what do you choose as your fifth, but several different things went into this decision for choice making. So often our kids don't have choices. So often. And they're frustrated and behavior's working, but they just want the chance to make a choice. Every single person needs the ability to make choice. Can we limit the choices? Absolutely. It is our job as adults and teachers to limit the choices. But if we can just give them the opportunity to understand that they have power and that they have the ability to control their own environment, maybe they'll stop trying to control it in other ways. And so I really liked that we landed on choice making. I think it's really important.
I totally agree with you, but I go into classrooms and they say, oh no, we can't give him choices, he freaks out. And I said, so how are you giving him these choices? And it's always verbal.
Right.
And I say, no, can't be verbal. And I said, I showed him, I didn't have a visual with me, because I didn't just use my hands. And I said, this is this, and this is this. And then I repeated it, and I said, okay, this is going to the computer, and this is, and they'll choose a hand. Yeah. But they can't seem to remember the choices sometimes. It freaks them out.
Oh, absolutely, because it's going away, right? This all goes back to the salience transience thing. I had a really hard moment for me. I went to a school this fall, but I was not there as a consultant. I was there to bring my students there, my deaf ed students at ISU, and I was asked if I would do my observation of a classroom in a room with complex learners. Okay, maybe these people have heard my beef before, but they're like, Dr. Borders will want to come in this room. This is where all the complex kids are. Hard professional moment for me because I so wanted to intervene. There was so much behavior in that classroom, and it was exactly this problem, and I've seen it hundreds of times where you have a little one and she's just fiery. We'll say that. She's fiery, and she has decided that she doesn't want to do the activity at the table, and the teacher has gone up to her and said, you can put on your implants, or you guys know this, right? You've seen this. And she just keeps saying it. You can do this, or you can go there. This is supposed to be reinforcement. Guess what? Was this reinforcing? No. What was this? Work. You can go and you can go over here with your friends, or you can sit, this is the way Christi Borders interpreted it. You could come over here and work and do something that you really struggle with all the people that you can't stand, or you could sit here and have complete control over your environment and do what you want, and guess what? She's the classic deaf kid. She does this. That's control. That's a brilliant child. That is cognition at its finest right there. Why in the world? That is not a choice. And the teacher was like, I give them choices all the time. And it was all verbal, and it wasn't, that isn't a choice. That's not a choice. It's a pretty easy choice, actually. She chose to continue engaging in this behavior. And it was never presented visually, and it was never, ever given as something that is going to decrease that behavior. So yeah, choice making for me is a really important one.
And make the connection with, as part of the work is trying to make this connection with Common Core.
Yes.
And one of the things we think about mathematics and Singapore math, teaching mathematics, is they start with the visual. And it's really that concrete, and then they go to the abstract. So it's the same thing, and I like the fact that we now have that as a resource, but I think just really reminding people that that's also going to help them too with the visuals, and then they're able to go more to the abstract.
Absolutely, that you go from that very concrete to abstract, and that's the way we learn all content. And so math definitely points to that, and it's no different in behavior. Absolutely no different. For some reason, we as teachers categorize behavior in a different folder in our heads than we do content, but it's learning a skill, regardless. It's all skill learning. So you don't have to read the article. We brought it, in case you want to. I don't know. In case you have somebody who goes, well, where do I even start? Here. Start with these 5. Pretty big 5. Pretty, maybe not all-inclusive, but would be a pretty good start, I think, if you had to start somewhere. I keep clicking oh, there it is. You can go. I need a drink of water.
So we're going to do a quick overview of functional behavior assessment because I know this is what you guys targeted a lot last year. Why do we do FBAs? What's the point of doing a functional behavior assessment? Yes. So we can identify why a student is engaging in their behavior, to identify what that reason is. What are some of the validated or the research-based reasons or functions of behavior? Why do students engage in behavior? Yes. To obtain something or avoid and escape something? Absolutely. What are some of those things that they are trying to gain access to? Attention, absolutely. What else? A tangible, an item or an activity. Anything else? Sensory, that's a huge one, absolutely. And what are the same, and well, we just said those things. They also will use their behavior to avoid or escape those same things. And so those are the reasons that we use our behavior. I would interpret that as a sensory.
I don't know if you all heard the question. The question was, she went to a workshop, and underneath gain or escape, gain was to gain self-regulation. I would absolutely answer that the same way, that self-regulation is a sensory.
It's a sensory-related need, and so
People don't want to go to that sensory
right.
piece. So we tend to talk about, I guess, more self-regulation.
and that's what's really cool about these, is it doesn't matter what that label is. These are the basic functions of behavior for everybody in this room. How many of you right now are tapping your foot?
That's what I was just looking. Like,
how many's chewing gum?
Tappers.
Who's playing with their hair? These are all things that we are doing at every moment to regulate our own sensory system. We're doing it to rev our systems up because we've been sitting here for 3 hours and we haven't had lunch yet. Or we're doing it to calm ourselves down. But we all engage in these sensory-related behaviors. But for our kiddos that we're supporting, it may look a little bit different. So for our students that have autism, what are some of the ways that you see them regulating their systems?
Or trying to regulate their systems. What'd you say? Rocking.
So, rocking, yes, you have your rockers.
Stimming.
Stimming how? We've got our I'm not going to flap. We've got our flappers. We've got our light filterers. So they are using their behavior to help regulate their system. So I would definitely include self-regulation as a way to meet those sensory needs. We all do them. They just look a little bit different for our students.
Well, and I think that that's one of the things that I always go back to when people are, well, that doesn't apply to this student. Well, it applies to me. Don't you dare take my planner. If Outlook doesn't beep at me, I will not show up. It's not going to happen because I have no memory whatsoever. I laugh so hard in a group. You can tell walking in a room which group of people have young kids. And all of my former students in here know that I can't teach without something in my hand, which is why I'm a mess today because I'm not holding something, and that I do this constantly.
Sway.
Now, people can tell me this was to regulate my baby. Heck no, because he's 2, and I'm still rocking. Don't make me stand still or then I'm in real trouble. It's the same thing for your students, and I think sometimes you just have to, not that you're going to call them out and be like, noticed you were toe tapping during our meeting, but you need to.
The way we
make
do
that
it
real.
is we regulate internally. So we do it without even really realizing we're doing it. And the way that we regulate our systems, they're socially acceptable behaviors. The tapping, the hair twirling.
But when I do this to Nikki,
It's not appropriate.
excuse me,
It
while
looks a little bit different.
I'm inappropriately touching.
They're externally regulating their system, so we can see it, and it's not as socially acceptable. So instead of decreasing and stopping that, it's serving a function for them. So we just have to identify what would be a better replacement, what sensory strategy that can we put in place to meet that same need. So we'll talk about that as we move on.
We also added on here, and I don't know if you all have heard this conversation in the field or not, but we have this conversation, and those of us who teach behavior classes are always 6 functions of behavior. There's 6 functions of behavior. Just identify one of the 6 or 3 of the 6. Let's just be honest. Lots of them can serve multiple functions, right? So we've always talked about 6. Well, recently entered into this conversation is the idea of a 7th. And that 7th being power and control.
Does anybody think he does it just to control his environment? He's controlling. He's trying to manage everything. Does that sound like something that you've heard? Okay, well, here's my question back at that. How does your student wake up in the morning? Typically, who gets them up? A parent. Do they pick out their own clothes, or are their clothes already picked out for them? Usually they're picked out and they need help putting them on. So then what's next? Breakfast. Do they make their own breakfast? Do they sometimes even have choice of what that breakfast is going to be? Probably not. Breakfast is already made at the table. Okay, clothes on, let's go brush your teeth, go potty, let's go eat breakfast. Oh, bus is here, get your book bag, let's go. So from the moment they wake up till they get to school, how many opportunities do they have to make choices? How much power and control do they have in their morning routines? Typically from the moment they wake up to when they go to bed, there's not that many opportunities. And so they don't have the chance for power and control. So it's absolutely a validated function because we all know that we need a little bit of power and control. Some of us may need a little bit more power and control than others. However, when we don't provide opportunities for that, that's when we may see some of those behaviors.
Catch-all is control.
Yeah.
Everybody says, oh, there's reasons for control. And I said, well, think about it. If you're not getting the attention you want, then you try to take control. So go back to attention. If you want a tangible, you don't get it. Don't you want to take control? It's not control, it's tangible. However, with our OGD kids, it's control.
It's different.
Absolutely.
It's totally different.
Absolutely.
So those are basically the group, the OGD kids are the ones that I see with calm control. Everybody else, the control would have to do with one of those.
But even if you take a look at that situation when it is a power and control issue, one of my favorite stories is where I was in a classroom and the teacher was filling me in on what had happened in the past day. It was a classroom that I was out in almost every other day. And she said, you know what? He walked up to the curtain, he grabbed it and he pulled it down. he was trying to piss me off. I'm like, well, let's take a look at that situation. What else was he maybe getting out of it?